Panel for the Palo Alto grades taped. I do want to remind our community advisory members that please use your microphone so that it goes with the video today. My name's Eileen Goodwin. I am the meeting facilitator. I'm going to have us all introduce ourselves, including the audience members who choose to do so. We'll go around the table first, then we'll go through the audience, and I'll run through the agenda, and then we'll get going. This meeting does go till 6 p.m. I fully expect it to go that long today. We have a lot to talk about, but maybe we'll end early, but it would be unusual. And so without further ado, I'm going to have Rob introduce himself. We'll go around the table, and then I'll call on our audience members.
Hi everyone, Rob DeGhost, Deputy City Manager. Great to see you again. I did want to mention that maybe most of you have heard, but I have accepted a position to be City Manager of Westlake Village in Los Angeles, and I'll be starting there in early March. So I'll be here through the end of February, but then I won't be here. And I do want to take a moment here to introduce Wayne Tonda over here, and he'll introduce himself as we go around, but he's at the end of the table. He works for MRG, and he is already working with the city and helping with a variety of transportation projects, and he's going to be helping with the grade separation after I leave, so you'll see more of him going forward. Okay.
Greg?
Hey, I'm Greg Braille, CAP member from the Duveneck St. Francis neighborhood.
Chris?
Chris Logan from South Palo Alto.
Tony?
Tony Carrasco.
Philip Burton, Midtown, south of Midtown.
Nadia Naik for Old Palo Alto.
Megan?
Megan Kahn, the downtown neighborhoods, and I live in University South.
Dave Shen, Old Palo Alto.
Mandar Borkar, South Palo Alto.
And we have some team members here today. Peter?
Peter DiStefano, Civil Engineer with AECOM.
John Mayer, AECOM, Track Engineering.
Millette Litzinger, AECOM.
And Eddie Mercurio, AECOM.
And then Wayne, you want to introduce yourself, and then we'll have Chantel and everybody go down the row.
Thank you, Rob, for the introduction, but I'm Wayne Tonda, and you'll be seeing a bit more of me for a couple months.
And Wayne and I worked together when he was in San Jose 30 years ago, I think it was. All right. Parag, if you would introduce yourself as we get folks set.
Oh, sure, yeah. I've been on the CAP for a year now. I live in South Palo Alto.
South Palo Alto. Okay, Chantel.
Chantel Cotton Gaines, City Manager's Office, and also on the Rail Grade Separation Team for the city.
Gary?
Gary Lindgren, near Addison School.
Stuart Hansen,
Welcome.
Barbara Hazlett, property owner, and Professor Bill in downtown.
Welcome.
Rob Leditsky, Embarcadero.
Thank you, and thanks for all the community members. I do know we have two traffic folks here with us. Ruta? Nyan? And they're, oh, hey, hi. Introduce yourself. Great. Thanks for being here. And thank you, public members who've been very, very good at being coming as attendees to our CAP consistently. We really appreciate that diligence. So today, if you haven't had a chance to get a copy of the agenda or the packet, and if you wish one, they're at the end of the table. Right by Parag, between Parag and Tony. We just did welcome and introductions, and in just a moment I'm going to circle back to Rob, who's going to explain why we at one point had telegraphed that financial update would be on today's agenda, and it is not, so I want to have Rob explain that after I go through what is on our agenda. We're going to start with the community conversations. This is the time for the CAP members to report out if they've had any interactions with their communities and sort of what the vibe is out there, if they've made any formal presentations, et cetera. It's usually a very rich conversation, as well as Chantel and folks from the city reporting on whether or not there's been any kind of email contact, et cetera, to the staff. So we take that item first. Then we'll go and as a group, we'll talk about the city council meeting debrief. And we're wanting to clarify what, I know many of you were at the city council meeting. We really appreciate that. We'll talk about what's still considered an alternative and some of the outstanding requests that we've had over time. Then we'll move into sharing the citywide tunnel video, which is the north portal only. This was shared with the city council, has not changed much from that version, right? Not at all. So those of you who are at the council or maybe had a chance to look at it online is the same thing, but we will be playing it here today and talking it through with the benefit of having our engineering team here to answer questions. Then we'll move into Churchill pedestrian crossing update. This is a similar presentation as to what was given to your the traffic safety committee for the school, safe routes to school.
It was the
City
school traffic safety.
Yeah, I was right. Okay, traffic safety committee. So we'll go through those alternatives and a discussion of the no partial closure. Then we've got Ruta and Nayan here to talk about what they've been doing as far as traffic counts and what they're seeing and et cetera. And then, as I mentioned, Rob's going to talk about the deferred financial update here in just a second, the why behind that. We'll give you very briefly an update on the 27th. We still are tracking for our community meeting at the end of March. We're going to need your help to get the word out, and the city's in the process of developing a flyer, so you can use that to put it out to your network. And then we'll do the summary of action items and set our next meeting is same bat time, only in March. So it'll be March 13th here at 4 o'clock, and that is our last scheduled CAP meeting. So, Rob, if you would take why we're deferring item number 7.
Yeah, so just quickly on the finance. First of all, we have a pretty packed agenda already. There's a lot to talk about here, and sometimes we can feel a little rushed. So I think it's, it was a little too packed in the first place. And also, we're still working on the financial update. The AECOM are doing some good work, review of the business tax and what other cities have done around business taxes. But we also want to put that in context with the other funding opportunities that may exist with the federal, state, and other local opportunities. So anyway, we weren't quite ready for that for today, so we will pick that up likely at the next meeting. A quick update on the VTA Measure B funds. That was held up in the courts there for a while. It's not held up anymore. So the VTA have reached out to the 3 cities, Sunnyvale, Mountain View, and Palo Alto, and have putting together 2 groups, a sort of a city managers, elected officials group, and a staff working group to begin the process of really developing a criteria for how the funding will be divided up, a cash flow analysis of when the money will be available and how it will be distributed. And so that work will begin actually within this next month. So by March 13th, they'll already have had a first meeting, so we'll be able to update you on the VTA funding. So that's that.
Okay, great. Does anybody have any questions of Rob on this item? Okay, seeing none. I do want to also make time under item number 2, community conversations. First, we'll do what we're hearing out in the community. We'll do our emails, and then I will have, Stuart has asked to have some time at the podium under that topic, so we'll get him up before we move into the city council meeting debrief. So what are you hearing? I know there's been some buzz about our governor's State of the State speech, so I'm imagining that'll be one of our topics. But before we get to that, has anybody done any outreach style meetings since we last met? Yeah, Phil.
I had a very short informal meeting over the phone, actually, with St. Andrew's Church. I spoke to somebody there, finally got hold of them, and the comment was, well, I have several comments. First, most of our membership, our parishioners should say, do not live in Palo Alto, so we don't care. I tried to overcome that, but I couldn't. Second, we're all concerned that the city will follow the example they did when they did a pedestrian overpass over 101 and gold plate the solution unnecessarily. Without comment to the specific alternatives, just we're concerned about a gold plated solution. And that's all I could get.
On any alternative?
On any alternative.
Okay, good. Other folks that have been out and about? Tony? And then Megan?
My feedback is, again, Palo Alto Avenue, do not close it. People are getting more enraged. I've sort of explained that it's going to happen in a comprehensive plan study, or I've forgotten it. Yeah, coordinated area plan. concerned about Embarcadero. There's a lot of opportunity there where Embarcadero crosses Alma to be able to make it more pedestrian and safer and easier to cross and easier to go west from northbound. Confusion about 4 tracks, is it HSR, need, or Caltrain? Then Nadia and I are going to do a presentation on the 25th and 26th to key members of the downtown community, including the Chamber of Commerce. I think that's it, yeah.
Okay, Megan, and then others.
Thanks. I had a community meeting with some folks from downtown North. I walked the neighborhood and handed out flyers and got, I think, 12 people.
Oh, wow.
I think the main thing that I took away from it was that folks weren't that all concerned about Palo Alto Ave being moved into the downtown coordinated area plan, but what they were still confused about is why we were doing this. So I think more clarity on the state of traffic now, using the new traffic data that we have, and the state of traffic in our imagined future perfect world would be helpful, and I hope that that's something that we could provide at the community meeting.
Okay, great, great feedback. Other folks, Greg?
Real quick, I'll let Stuart speak for himself since he came, which is great. But I did email some of you. I found out about the elimination of funding for high-speed rail from an email that was forwarded to me. The subject line was, well, I guess we don't have to worry about those grade separation community meetings anymore. So my fear is that the average Palo Alton, who does not know what's going on with this process at all, associates it all with HSR.
Okay.
So we have to find. Also, Stuart did point out to me the community meeting that we canceled. None of us went, but other people did, and they were wondering why we weren't there. So.
And if Chantel could address that, because that was a city thing. I know you did try and put the word out. So what did the city do just to get it on the record in case you get that comment again? I know the city did try and really get the word out to people.
Yes, one of the pieces where we did say next time we'll make sure we do is we didn't have something posted on the door. So we followed up with some residents from the Crescent Park neighborhood. I think a couple of them had shown up. So that is we'll take that as staff. We did communicate it through all of the electronic networks that we have. So the next door, and it was reshared through that, and all of our social media channels, et cetera, and posted on the website, both the city's website and calendar as well as the project website. So definitely the posting on the door / one of us sitting there saying, sorry, the meeting's canceled. That is something that we'll make sure we do in the event that that type of thing happens in the future. Thank you. Very good feedback.
Okay, Chris.
Well, it was an opportunity last week when I sat through 6 light cycles to get across Charleston Road to get to my house, which was on the other side of the road. And from Wilkie and Park, took 6 light cycles for me to achieve that. I didn't want to talk to anybody about it because everybody was really frustrated. And I think
What time of day, and was there anything unusual?
It was 6 o'clock. Don't usually go out that time, but I had to go home from a medical appointment, picked up prescription at Walgreens and saw what it was like, didn't like it. And the people got really frustrated, and rightfully so. And then when the bar finally came down, the car ahead of me was just far enough into it. He was on the tracks for momentarily. Now, the good news was that there were 2 cars on the other side, which probably shouldn't have been there, but they did give him room to get out of the way. And I came away from that experience re-energized on this ought not to be a problem. We need to have this stuff separated because I don't experience it very much, only because I don't go there often now that I'm retired. But if I had fewer options about timing my routes, I would get more exercised about it and frustrated, so.
No, thank you. And that was, as I think some of us recall at our first meeting, we tried to show some of the bad behavior as the reason. And I really want to camp out a little bit on what Greg said about, the connection between high-speed rail and the perception that without that project, you don't need these grade steps. And so maybe I'm looking at Chantel, that maybe we need to be very explicit about the wording for the 27th flyer to be, almost, literal about the fact you may have heard about the high-speed rail. Well, we're still, moving forward because this is a need with or without. I mean, I think maybe we just need to paint a really blunt picture to make that clear. Nadia, some thoughts?
So definitely, yes. I would also say, even just in the conversations I had with the community, the business community specifically, number one, they feel like they've really been excluded from this process. I don't think they have anyone on the TAC, and they certainly don't have anyone in this group. And so I think it's obviously, especially with this idea of a downtown coordinated area plan, we need to do a lot of outreach to them. But second, there seems to be this misunderstanding that you can simply fix the timing of the lights and that will fix the problem. And it's basically, Josh had done a presentation a while back that we should maybe dig up and use some of those slides. It basically talked about that there's the 45 seconds of gate downtime, but to Chris's point, it is the light cycle and the multiple clearances that are required, and when you have that much train preemption, they just can't get back to the spot number one and clear the intersection. And that is a lesson that, frankly, we need to repeat every time we have a meeting, because, if we only do it once a year, then it's only the people who go to that one meeting who hear it. And it piggybacks on the explanation of not just why fixing the lights don't just work, but we also need the grade separations for Caltrain. So also that graphic that Josh had done, and I can send it if that's helpful. He did a thing that showed the number of interruptions you would have with the number of trains in the future, and just how many times per 60 minutes that would happen, and basically showing that the degradation would just be too extreme. So to the point that he had quantified it, I think in like percentage of, you'd lose like 40% of crossing time or something. That would be super helpful, because to understand that at rush hour, 40% of traffic wouldn't get through is something that really energizes people.
Yeah, and I think just to close that loop, and then I'll call on Phil, we would love to see those slides, because I would for sure want to have the Nyan and Rucha look at them. But, we are starting to prepare our PowerPoint, so it would be great to refresh everybody on that. So thank you. If you could send those to us, that'd be great. Phil?
A couple of years ago, I attended a Caltrain presentation in San Mateo, and there were people there who did some computer simulation modeling of the effect of increased traffic on gate downtime. I don't remember the date or the title of the slides, but those might be useful, because it isn't just somebody waving their arms. It was computer simulation modeling, which is a very respected technique. About the only way you can do
Was that from Caltrain staff itself? Or was that a city?
I believe it was Caltrain staff. I'm going back in my memory now.
Okay. Are you familiar with
at the same meeting, by the way, they also...
I'm not familiar with that, so we'll have to check. If you could check, I don't know if there's a way you could let us know at least a time frame that we could check with Caltrain staff.
They also did some presentation on positive train control at that same meeting, if I remember correctly. So I'll try to dig that up. I'll go through my Outlook.
That'd be great, Phil. Thank you. And it's around the time of PTC. That's great. Yeah.
I think at the last meeting, we talked about potentially doing an animation that would represent what happens with the gate downtime, even if it's sped up. We talked about that at the last CAP meeting. I want to be sure that we definitely captured in the notes, because when City Council has to go back and scope the work that's left, that would be super helpful.
And anything you want to add on that, Millette or Etty, as far as?
I mean, the only thing I was seeing on the website was I think we had the quote that Josh used to say about gate crossings will come down many more times each day, as much as 45 seconds every 33 minutes. Is that what you were referring to, or something else?
He also had a graphic that was kind of these arrows, and it showed, it was just a visual representation of just how bad it gets. And also he had a thing with intersections showing just how much degradation would happen at certain key points, in the future. And to be honest, I think that probably needs to be updated, but something along those lines that graphically represents that basically timing the lights is not possible. We need to dispel that rumor, because it's pretty widespread, and it's a problem.
Okay, I got it in here. It's an action item. We'll take that. Yeah, Megan.
I had one quick point in question. So I was standing on the Caltrain platform trying to get to the city twice in the last 2 weeks, and there was a fire truck from the firehouse on Alma trying to get through the University Avenue grade separation, and it took them, I videoed it took them a minute and a half to get, because there were simply cars backed up all the way through the loop. So I was wondering, I know we've brought this up before, but have we discussed with the fire department and gotten feedback from the emergency services on our plans?
Have you met with them yet?
No, we've talked internally with them. I mean, they're obviously very supportive of grade separation. It's going to speed up their response time significantly. So they're aware of this, tracking it. Probably would be a good idea at some point to have the team actually have a sit down with them.
Okay. Great paper. You can when we're done with this, and then I'll be happy to call on you. Thanks, Barbara. Others? Yes, Parag.
So during the December council meeting, right, so I was under the impression that there would be voting going on.
Oh, well, that's the next agenda item. If you could hold that, that's item number 3, city council meeting debrief.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll take you first there. Okay, anybody else under what you've done, any kind of presentations, et cetera?
So.
Okay, yeah, David and Prague. I'm sorry, Amanda.
So I got 2 questions from the community. The first one was, now that the South Palo Alto Tunnel is on one of the alternative lists, what's the plan going forward, if you can answer it during the meeting at some point?
Okay.
That's one question that I got. And the second one that I got was around, why did we choose the North Portal side of, like when we did the tunnel analysis, the citywide tunnel analysis, was there a reason for picking this one side to start the construction versus some other?
So that's item number 4. So we do have some engineering assumptions that I believe John is going to be talking about related to that under that item. So we'll get you an answer.
Those were the 2 questions that we
Thank you. Great. David.
Just a quick one. One thing came up was, might have been 2 city council meetings ago when the city presented their response to the Stanford GUP EIR. And we said, 2 things, I guess. One is probably should add those to financial update if possible in the event that some funds come in through that avenue. But also, we may want to, I don't know how we would get involved with this, but it seemed like it'd be something that we really got to start pushing on because there could be significant revenue.
And I think if it was the December meeting that I was there, I think the city manager committed to talking about the GUP and funding and certainly for the downtown plan. So we'll get that added to the financial update for next month. What else? Did you have another one?
That's it.
Okay. Anybody else under this topic? Nadia.
So 2 more things really for the record. Number 1 is, I think for the community meeting, we should make clear that the governor's comments yesterday about high-speed rail do not change Caltrain electrification, just in terms of funding and understanding that that project still goes forward, because I think there's a lot of questions about that. And second is, among the CAP, there was kind of emails floating around about what is the ultimate process that we're actually going through in terms of a city. In other words, what happens, are we eventually going to go to a ballot measure, and is the ballot measure what decides if it's a viaduct or not? Is it that the city council decides and then the city might have to, the residents would have to vote on whether they agree to that? Would we vote on a funding mechanism citywide as part of an election? So kind of a better understanding of like really pulling the lens back and where does all this fit into an eventual vote? And it came up basically in the case of the historical sense of in 1957, there was a citywide vote to vote for the grade separation of Oregon Expressway. And so what do we do now? So I just want to put that out there as something that we should think about making sure that we make clear as we go forward, because people want to understand how this entire process fits into that bigger, larger political one.
So Rob, do you have something you can give them today as we're thinking about the next 6, or do you want to put it under another item? Or?
Yeah, I think it's relevant under the next item, right? The city council debrief and.
Okay, so then we'll talk about process under that. All right, I do have a couple of people who want to speak in the audience, but I also want to make sure that we get on record, and I see Tony's hand up, about the feedback that's come in through the public, through the website before I go to the public. Okay, Tony, yes,
So
one more
I
item.
spoke with one ex-mayor who had one brilliant idea. He has many, but he suggested for the financing that we look at a transfer of a transfer tax when you sell real estate. And he thought politically that might be an easier one than others.
Good point.
And he said also don't give up on the tunnel, which I don't know.
Okay. All right, we'll add that to Paul's list of things to look at. Paul's our financial part of the team. Okay, we're going to take Chantel, and then I'm going to go to the audience. Stuart will go first, and then we'll have Barbara. Yes?
Super fast. So the emails that we received up through the December 17th city council meeting where this went forward. We included those in the agenda packets. We'll also post that to the Connecting Palo Alto webpage, and then the emails we received since, we're compiling them and we'll also post them. We get, I don't know, it's probably about 10-ish per month. They're mostly clustered around when the council meetings happen, so it's a little bit more around the December meeting, and then there were quite a few for around the January 22nd. So we'll cluster them together and post them to the website probably early next week is my estimate.
Sorry, you're saying on the Connecting Palo Alto website?
Yes, on the
And-
Connecting Palo Alto.
And so what would the tab be that it would be under?
I will find a logical place.
Okay, thank you.
We are looking at reorganizing some things on the website to make it a little more regular person intuitive versus deep in this project intuitive. So I will let you know where it's posted once it's posted. But for now, if you wanted to read it, that's why the December report was 200 some pages, is because the bulk of that was community comments to the city council. And so it'll be those comments plus the ones we've received since then.
Okay, so the action items, you'll send a link to the CAP members, or Rob will still do it because you're still here through
We're
the end
giving
of the
Rob all
month.
kinds of tasks until
Yeah.
he's out next week.
So look for yet another email from Rob before the end of the month on pinging where those are so you can go look at them. Okay, Stuart, this is your time to go, if you would, to the lectern because we need to get you on a microphone. And then we'll get Barbara up on the on-deck circle.
By the way, it's good to meet Greg and Tony. I haven't seen their faces until now. Glad you can make it.
So you're virtual friends. Yeah, it's like a date. You have to turn it, so press that round button so it's red. Yeah, there we go.
Okay, Stuart Hansen. I live in sort of central Palo Alto near Green Gables and Duveneck schools. And a lot of the neighbors and friends that we have been talking about this particular page that's been handed out and looked at by many people now, specifically for the Meadow and Charleston corridor. We've been looking at ways to improve these three columns. And what we centered on was the second and third columns there, which are the hybrid and the viaduct approaches for this corridor. Looking at ways to implement that or to improve it. And what we came up with is sketched on this piece of paper here. Maybe you guys can pass this around, because I don't have the skills or the resources to make a real presentation out of this. In short notice, anyway. There's about, I think there's 12 there.
Oh, that's great. We can share. Not a problem.
Okay.
Let's get Rob a copy.
What we came up with after noting in the 25th of January Post, I think it was, or maybe it was the Weekly. I think it was the Weekly, yeah, Bill Johnson's article, that number 1, 2, and 3 up there are what was put forward in this article in the newspaper. The underground tunnel is cost prohibitive. I think we've heard that since almost day one. The aerial viaduct is opposed by those that live in South Palo Alto, perhaps for noise and aesthetic reasons. And thirdly, still on the table, according to this article, are these 4 alternatives, including the citywide tunnel, the aerial viaduct, and the trench and the hybrid approaches. So that was what we used as a reference for the most recent information that we have as local residents. And what we came up with there, as you see, is to bring the viaduct down to ground level, or the tunnel, which will probably never get built, up to ground level. And if we do that, it appears that there's an affordable and a practical way to take the features, most of the features anyway, that are listed on this chart again, and combine them into something that is listed there as a method to bring the cost-effective aerial viaduct down to ground level and out of the elevated visual space that those that live in the South City are opposed to. I think it would also reduce the noise from rail, wheels, and so on, especially if we used an absorbing coating on the inside of this sound structure. It could also overcome the need for a shoe fly track, because the 2 tracks, in some cases, would still be available during the construction of basically these outer walls. And also, we think that there would be benefits of lower cost and more rapid construction because it's a rather simple structure. It doesn't require a lot of earth movement or other things related to upset in the tracks or the roadway on Alma and things like that. And lastly there, it would probably and most likely provide safety improvements, especially compared to an elevated viaduct. You can imagine if there was a train failure on an elevated viaduct, or maybe worse yet, in a tunnel underground, what would the passengers be faced with? Pretty difficult situation if they had to get out of that train. Where are they going to go? So if we have something at ground level, at least passengers can safely debark. And it also offers a barrier to public getting on the tracks if we have this kind of a sound wall shell on the existing track and right-of-way. So that was the basis of what we came up with, and we think that for the road crossings, we would think that either an elevated viaduct or a hybrid road under, rail over could be used on those two crossings, especially if we think about reducing the level to the roadway level, the existing roadway, which is about 5 feet below the hump over the tracks. We could take the roadway down to just a level crossing without much upset to the adjoining Alma and other intersections. And then that would take away from the overall height that's needed for a viaduct or a hybrid rail over. The other thing that would likely follow from that is that the 1% preferred grade approach to these overcrossings, we could probably manage that and get rid of this problem that seems to come up about freight trains and the 2% grade. Apparently that's difficult, or it's just not feasible to bring freight trains up at that steep grade. So that's the thesis here, and just wanted to put it in front of you for something to consider, and be happy to have any feedback I can take to my neighbors.
Okay, thank you very much, and thanks for making copies so that the CAP members can take a look at it. Does anybody have any clarifying questions for Stuart? All right, seeing none, Barbara, your turn. Oh, I'm sorry, Megan, did you have a question?
Yeah, I fundamentally don't understand what's being proposed.
It's at grade with basically a shell, and then
Are we still separating the road from the rail, or no?
Yes, he's proposing either the road would either go up or under, but the track would have sort of a shell on what would be the shoe fly area.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's approximately, in that way you wouldn't have the construction disruption. Okay, Barbara, you're on.
Thank you. Barbara Hazlett from Professorville in downtown. I want to circle back to your comment, Rob, and first I want to congratulate you on your new job. Fantastic. But in any event, back to the point that the emergency responders are proponents of the grade separations. What do they think about the potential closure of Palo Alto Ave and Churchill Ave in North Palo Alto and reducing the east-west conduits through town to really just University and Embarcadero? And particularly as you see the traffic buildup that happens, on El Camino trying to get onto Embarcadero, vice versa. I think if we close off the Palo Alto Ave, to bring people into Palo Alto, I just can't imagine how the emergency responders are going to be able to respond. So just curious if you've had feedback from the emergency responders on that note. Thank you.
Yeah.
Update for Barbara?
I don't. I'll have to circle back with the CAP or staff will, because it's a very good point. I mean, they are concerned about any type of closure of access because they want to respond as quickly as possible. So I think they would be concerned about that, and if we didn't have appropriate mitigations that would allow them to be able to navigate that closure, they would have some significant concerns. So as we get into the analysis of Churchill in particular and look at and we're not going to do that today, but next month we will be looking at those mitigations. Between now and then, we'll talk with the public safety staff. Yeah.
Great. All right. Chantel.
Sorry, a little unrelated, but I did think of one of the sort of veins of the community outreach we've received recently. I believe the high school students have been talking about this with one of the teachers. So we've had a couple high school students that have reached out to us trying to learn more, and I'm trying to encourage them to get more involved and encourage their peers to do that. So it's a feel-good part of our engagement.
So I work at Palo, if you need any help, I'm happy to and high school students with civic engagement.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. All righty. All right, we're going to move on because we have a lot to cover. And Rob, if you would keep going with the city council meeting debrief, and then Parag in particular had a question and an observation. Okay. So what we're going to talk about here first is a list of alternatives still pending, as well as anything else you wanted to add.
Okay. So how many people attended the January 22nd? Were you there? For all 4.5 hours, like we were. Okay.
And we get extra credit for being there in December as well.
Yeah, right. And it's appropriate because it's such a big project and a big deal to the citizens of Palo Alto. But so we have 6 alternatives that remain. We have a South Palo Alto tunnel, and that includes an alternative with freight on the surface. We have the Churchill closure. We have Meadow Charleston hybrid, Meadow Charleston trench, Meadow Charleston viaduct, and we still have the citywide tunnel as the alternatives. In addition to that, the council also did support the idea of separating Palo Alto Avenue and having a coordinated area planning effort for the downtown, which would include grade separation for Palo Alto Avenue as a separate parallel study. They did agree to remove the bike pedestrian crossing in the Loma Verde area, but they did suggest and recommend that be part of the North Ventura Coordinated Area Plan that's currently underway. In addition to that, they wanted a couple of other things, and specifically they wanted staff to come back and discuss the criteria for evaluating a grade separation, as well as the timeline and funding, and also what are the potential polling strategies for actually coming to a decision on either a preferred solution or the funding for a preferred solution. So,
Question, did they vote to keep the South Palo Alto Tunnel? I thought they gave direction to amend the scope of work and look at how much it would cost to study
Yes.
it, but not officially include it yet in the list of alternatives.
yeah, thank you for that clarification.
Okay.
It was, for staff to develop the scope and budget for doing that, and then return to get the authority. Yeah, right. And so there were a couple of other things, and if you have questions about that, we can go to that. But just in the interest of time, I wanted to also mention, related to the council, then that we have a new council, a 7-member council. There's questions about will we have a rail committee this year? Well, the council did decide that they'll have what they call a committee of the whole, which is really a full council. Will take up the rail topics. There isn't sort of a separate rail committee. We don't have a date for the committee of the whole or a council meeting to take up that yet. But so what we have is the March 13th CAP meeting. That's scheduled. We have the March 27th community meeting, and we are looking for a date, likely in March, for the council to have a meeting to talk about these other additional things like the criteria and the timeline, and perhaps polling and funding would be part of that discussion as well. So let me stop there, because you were all there as well, but that was the main takeaways from the council meeting.
Okay, I promised Parag you go first, and I see Phil's hands up.
Yeah, so one of the feedbacks I got from, so I actually made some effort to get folks at the city council meeting in December. And I was under the assumption, and I could be mistaken on this, that the council would vote on it. But what ended up happening was sort of a debrief session for the council. And there were probably 100-odd guys from the South Palo Alto, area that came to that meeting and left a little bit disappointed. Actually, quite a lot disappointed because, they didn't get to hear, or there was no voting going on, right? So is there any way for us to know ahead of time whether the council is going to vote on these proposals or not, or, that'll sort of set the expectations with these guys, right? Because they're coming there to sort of influence the vote.
Yeah. We try and do that, through the staff report that is prepared that has usually a recommended action or motion for the council to consider, or the options listed there. December was unusual with that particular meeting. There were so many people there, not for just that item, but other items, that it just wasn't time to get into the discussion. So they decided to hear the public, but not discuss and take action. And they moved that to then January. So that was just, yeah, an unfortunate thing that happened there.
So it was a surprise to you, too?
It was,
Yep.
yeah.
And to us. All right, Phil.
So, very briefly, Parag, I share your frustration. I share your frustration, Parag, that there were no votes taken in December, but I understand why. My question, Rob, is that with the new city council, if I remember correctly, 2 of the 7 members had to recuse themselves.
That's correct.
So that the committee of the whole is only 5 people rather than full 7.
That's right.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, Megan?
Is the mayor still recused?
He is still recused for the moment. As you know, if you've seen the presentation on the tunnel and where the tunnel actually begins, which is further south, I think there may be an opening there that allows him to actually come back in, but our attorneys are looking at that.
Okay, others on this topic before I ask anybody from the public? Yeah,
So I
Mander.
think so can you clarify what happens next with the South Palo Alto Tunnel aspect of it? Meaning we heard that this is what happened at the city council, so what's next for it?
So for the South Palo Alto Tunnel with the freight on the surface, that item, so there was interest in looking at that. Council agreed that we should look at it. We should define what that would cost to look at, and what that would do to the schedule. And so we're developing a scope and budget, and we'll return to council for further direction.
And so do we know when that would happen?
We don't have a timeline. It's going to have to happen soon. So we think probably March, April timeline.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else? Yeah. Yes, Chris.
Statement by someone that was I thought at one of the meetings, there was a statement by one of the engineering folks that indicated that having the surface freight and tunnel under would not work because, I don't remember why, but they seemed confident that it wouldn't work. That's it.
Exactly.
That's the point. That was it.
It would not qualify for funding. That was the
it.
rationale.
Okay, thank you.
And it was by a non-engineer.
Oh, well, I remembered somebody said it, so give me a point.
It's all right. No, it's all right. I'm just teasing you. But that's absolutely right. Okay. Anybody else on this topic before I go to the second half, which is the outstanding renderings, and then I'll open it to the public under this item. Chantal.
And I asked the staff member upstairs to bring down some copies of the actual action minutes from that day. So if you guys want to read through the actual motion that City Council adopted, just good to have in your back pocket.
Could I just clarify? So will any analysis on the South Palo Alto Tunnel, even if it's just the scope, be known before we have the community meeting? Or we're going to the community meeting without any information about a South Palo Alto Tunnel, and then if we decide to study that, we then have to have another community meeting to discuss that part?
So at the community meeting, we won't have done any work on actually the South Palo Alto Tunnel. But by that time, we will have prepared the scope and budget for that, and may even have had a chance to go back to council to get direction on whether they would be willing to fund that study.
Is this where you wanted to ask a little bit more about the tunnel in general?
Well, maybe when we see the video.
Okay, great. Okay, let's talk about the renderings. I know, Mander, you've been asking for some renderings. There's been sort of some random requests for additional things. And in the spirit of scope and schedule and budget, I wanted to throw it open to, I guess, Rob, about, there were some requests about getting some additional renderings from the perspective of a homeowner looking back at a viaduct, or some of the things that aren't currently in our treasure trove. So we talked about that, and I think the decision that was made in a project meeting was that would maybe come at some future point when you go back to talk about sort of next steps. But did you want to update the folks on that? Because I don't want people to be thinking we're working on something we're not working on as a project.
Yeah, only that we have a $1.2 million budget on the design for this, and we're burning through it quickly, and we've added meetings and scope in a variety of areas. So we just,
including the cap.
Yeah, and appropriately, because we, it's good, but there is a limit to how much we can do that, and these renderings are, they're costly to do. And so I think that you can help us there to narrow the ask, because we can't do it all. That may be an additional discussion as to which ones are actually have been asked, because I'm not sure about all of them, and say, okay, let's prioritize these and triage them to see which ones really are needed and the purpose for them and what they're going to yield. So that's where we are. We're not budgeted for it at this point.
Any thoughts on that, David?
Just one quick one. Would it cost less if they were not video, that they were just kind of stills? Okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
Well, so sort of on that thread, as a CAP member, I was caught off guard by seeing the tunnel video that we will be seeing next at the council meeting and not ever having discussed it or talked about it here, and not knowing how much those videos cost, but imagining that they're very expensive. I think if there had been anything on paper besides the original kind of side view that we were presented in August that even indicated at a high level that there would have been eminent domain with the type of configuration that was required, there could potentially have been some feedback from the CAP about whether or not it warranted going to the point of making a full video on something that was going to have that much eminent domain, because it's not likely to be popular. So I'm very happy to hear that there's a potential for the CAP to sort of look at, okay, look, it'll cost this much to do these things, and what do you guys think? Because if we had had a chance to even opine on, should you go through the trouble of making a video that shows that much eminent domain, probably the answer would have been no. And, since it seems like there's certainly a lot of popularity around the tunnel, but there's also a concern from the staff for a long time about the expense and the concern. And I mean, if you wanted to shorten that process, that would have been easier to do earlier.
Let me just say, and I'm not trying to be contrary, that renderings, even still drawings, perspective, aerial, so to speak, I think are far more effective in communicating to the lay public than engineering sections and plans. So I'd almost skimp on the sections and plans to do.
But in order to do accurate things, we
yeah.
need to do sections and plans. So
Sure.
you can't really, I mean, it's whether
Sections
or not
and
they get
plans,
shown,
yeah.
but they're still getting done. So
Okay,
you're
I
not
know-
saving money there, I think.
But I just
Is that
want
a
to say
fair
that.
statement, engineers? Okay.
Yes, okay.
So it's not I get what you're saying,
No, I know,
which
but-
you've said before, but it's not a cost cutting for
I
us.
think that I was shocked when I saw the amount of property taken to be necessary on the tunnel. And I agree with
Okay,
Roger.
well, let's hold that conversation
All right,
for the
thank you.
tunnel. That's our item after this.
Could you
Okay,
provide, so
yeah.
Rob asked if we could provide feedback on the outstanding renderings. Could we get a list of what the outstanding renderings are so we can provide that feedback?
Do we have an outstanding list?
So right now, the renderings are the ones that were presented for Charleston Meadow that were in the PowerPoint presentation. So, and there's stills there, and then there was another view from a backyard. So those are the ones that we have so far to date. So that's the baseline. So, go ahead.
It mostly was a request to see, I think, a street level view from the other side for all of those alternatives. So that was.
And it was Mander, so you
Yeah.
want to clarify what you were looking for?
So are those renderings actually on the Connecting Palo Alto website?
Yes. Yes, they're on our exhibit boards that were at the meeting, so you have to go look at the exhibit boards.
And they're also in the PowerPoint.
Yes, some of them are. Yeah, we put probably more of them in the city council presentation to highlight them more.
Yeah, the primary ones that I think folks are interested in from like the street level, that set. So I will be searching for that set.
So we did the street level, I believe, from the Alma side, but we didn't do it from the other side.
Yeah, the Alma ones for sure are in the PowerPoint towards the end, because I spoke to them under outreach on what was the sort of general feeling about the alternatives that we were talking about that night.
So again, I think if we can get a list of planned renderings,
I don't think we have any more planned, do we?
No, we will have some for the Churchill Ped Bike
Okay.
underpasses or crossings, grade crossings, but that's,
So maybe you could give me those and I'll put them in the minutes?
okay.
Okay, okay.
So maybe recommendation for Chantal. The problem I think that we have is that sometimes council gets shown things that the CAP hasn't seen and vice versa. And so the way things are currently going is that you'd have to know to look in the city council minutes and then look at those presentations to see some of the renderings. And they're not listed on the CAP site. And so if we could have kind of just one giant collection of every picture we've ever made about this project is a fantasy on the website, then that would just be easier because you're just sending people to one place because most people have no idea how to go dig through the meeting minutes.
Almost like a photo box and you could just.
Yeah, just anything, but at least they're all in one spot because
yep.
right now it's all spread out.
In one spot.
I think the only thing that falls in that category is was the tunnel video. That's the only thing that wasn't
No, I
seen
think they're
beforehand.
asking for all the visuals just to be in one spot, so you don't have to go to a PowerPoint
Right,
and
like
find
the
them.
renderings you
Right.
just mentioned, you said that were in the city council packets, but not necessarily.
No, they were on the exhibit boards that were at the community meeting, so they were included as part of that as
Right,
well,
but-
which is on the CAP website.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's Marie Kondo the website.
Yeah, exactly. All right, I'm going to move us on. We're going to talk, does anybody have any questions about this from the audience before I move us on to the tunnel video, and then we'll take some more public comment? Okay, seeing none, we'll show the tunnel video and then have a conversation about that. And I love this disclaimer. The following animation is a concept for discussion only. It is not a specific proposal. Did I do that?
Yeah, and can I just say,
Rob, do you want to tee this up?
well, only that we would show the CAP first, right? And then go to the council, rail committee, then council. But in this case,
Hey, Phil, if we can listen to Rob, this is important.
yeah, we're working on this tunnel concept, and we still have to do more work on it, and we'll be there by the time the community meeting comes around. But when we saw this particular video at the entrance on one side, we thought, gee, this was so relevant and significant that council needed to hear this now, even though we couldn't get it to the CAP first. So we did try and send it to you in advance of the council meeting, but then.
And they did email it to us.
And yeah, so ordinarily we wouldn't do that. We just thought it was important. That's so important that we should do it. And in fact, I felt like it was significant enough that we shouldn't proceed with this alternative for any further study. Of course, that didn't happen, in spite of more than just renderings, but a video that shows the impact, which I'm a little baffled by. So, well, let's watch the video, and then I'd love to hear your feedback.
And seriously, what is the difference between a concept for discussion and a proposal? Will this be, I don't know if I'm not a lawyer, will this be a proposal for the community meeting? Aren't they all just concepts for discussion?
I think they
Excellent
are.
question.
And we just wanted to amplify that very point because it shows specific impacts to specific properties. And you can imagine if you. lived
Okay,
in
so
those
we're not
areas.
saying I'm proposing to take, okay.
Right.
Yeah, so it was right-of-way related, I think was really what the point was. Okay, so just to tee it up and quickly, as you can watch this and as they're loading it, because I know it takes a bit, are you loading?
Yeah,
So-
it's ready. so
Okay,
we're
cool.
ready.
So I think to Rob's point, please watch this, and then we're going to kind of have you help Rob understand why perhaps some people in the community do not want to let go of this option, and any feedback you could give city staff or your project team here about why you think people, even after seeing this, are still interested in this sort of a project level impact, because we're a bit baffled. All right.
So John and I will just kind of narrate this. This is an aerial of Palo Alto with the north being to the left side and the south to the right side. The green line represents the tracks themselves, and Alma Street is immediately adjacent to the east. And this is just kind of pointing out some of the main features of it, and now we're zooming in to the north portal here. And we only looked at the north portal at this point in time because, again, as we saw these issues here, that's as far as we got. And can you pick why you picked this spot to Mander's question? So, yes, it's going pretty fast. So the reason the portal, the track was started at this location here is that first off, we're trying to stay within the city limits. And at the very north end is the city limits.
Yeah, can we pause it?
Oh.
It was going to
It's gonna start over.
I know, the city council meeting, it was.
All right, well, let's do it again. I think it's important that you guys really get this because you can help explain it to your neighbors.
Well, maybe she should explain it real quick before we go. I mean,
Yeah.
it's
Okay.
too hard to start narrating and then answer a
Right.
question in the middle.
So John, maybe I'll let John, because you're.
Right, if there's a question about.
Give them a mic. You're on. You have to be on the mic because they're videotaping this.
Yeah. So the question from Mondar was about, why was it selected for the north portal, which is right, just north of Churchill? And basically, at Palo Alto Ave, between Palo Alto Ave and University, there's not enough room to dive down far enough to begin the tunnel. You need 44 feet from ground level, essentially, to have the tunnel boring machine start boring. And so, also, the distance between Palo Alto Ave and University Ave is about 1,000 feet shorter than the distance between University Ave and Embarcadero. So, and if we were to start at Palo Alto Ave, we would have wiped out the Palo Alto station and that whole interchange. So we went south, just south of University, and started down, and there was just enough room before Churchill to get down to the proper depth and to start the tunnel boring machine.
I think the question is actually, or the question I've heard asked is why you didn't start in the southern half of the city and work northward? Because
that's exactly.
No, you need them both.
That was
right,
the question.
but there's
you
more
need the
space.
you see the exact space where you start and where you end.
Right, but there's more space. The right-of-way is wider still in South Palo Alto, I believe, than it is over by Churchill. So the question from the community was, why didn't you start in the 100-foot right-of-way section and come up within the right-of-way part versus the other entrance?
So to what John was just saying is you need portals at both ends. So what we're showing at the north end is going to be mirrored at the south end, other than it's wider and we haven't actually looked at that at this point in time.
So is it fair that you took the worst case?
Yes.
I mean, I think.
We just.
I mean, they need an answer, and I think the point was this was more constrained, so you need to see if it fit.
Okay, just to give you
Or
background,
what it would take.
One of the reasons why we are also asking all these questions to understand is
Right.
If and when we go to the South Palo to tunnel side of it, these would be some of the aspects that we need to understand.
Absolutely.
To design that aspect of it. So that's
Right,
that's the
it's
background to the question.
Right, because you need that 100-foot wide launch pit to be able to get the tunnel boring machines in and out. So it's still going to be an impact, but, farther south, granted, there is a wider, it's a 100-foot right-of-way, it's to 85 feet. Picked up some room there,
So will we have something on the March 13th CAP meeting to show the southern part so that before we go to the community meeting, we'll have both ends?
Yes.
That would be really helpful, I think, for you all to know that that's coming, and then you can see that.
And that would be especially useful, especially if that also applies, the same applies for the South Palo Alto tunnel.
That's what I'm saying. We'll show you what that looks like, what that footprint looks like and all that at the March 13th CAP meeting. So a month from today, we'll have that information, right?
And
So
most
a
specific-
footprint. We wouldn't necessarily have the full video, but you'll have that, the footprint that's the equivalent of the pit, right?
Right, because
Okay.
the most specific thing is that it's from starting in the north, it seems to swing out onto Alma and cause the most impacts. And so to the extent that we're trying to, those that are arguing for a tunnel are trying to figure out how to get in with the least amount of impacts
Right.
to make it as palatable as possible.
Absolutely.
Right, that's the question everyone's asking.
And so we'll have that a month from today.
So,
Phil?
maybe a dumb question, but it sounds like you can't just simply pull the tunnel boring machines back through the constructed tunnel instead of removing them at the end of the tunnel. Is that correct?
What's happening is, they're going to have to come out the same configuration as they go in. In
Mhm.
other words, the tunnel bores themselves, okay? So even if you were not to, if you were going to back the machines back again, the bores themselves had created that 100-foot wide pit,
All right.
see?
Okay,
And
thank
then
you.
from there, where that face is, then we're going to go with a cast-in-place subway box, continuing on past the twin bore tunnels as far as we can until we hit the surface. So
Cut and-
So you got the big
fill that
ramp.
pit in.
Cut and cover.
Got the
and-
ramp.
All right,
Right.
thank you.
Okay, let's look at the video again, and then we'll take some more questions. All right, so I think you want to talk about utilities and some of those things.
So again, this will start with the aerial view, kind of giving you the alignment. So the Caltrain tracks is the green. The red little bumps there are going to be the shoe flies in the north section, the north portal, and we're only going to concentrate on the north here. But again, you have something similar in the south where we're going to have to shoe fly around in order to construct the portal. And we're going to zoom down. Again, we're starting just past the Palo Alto Avenue platform is where we're going to start diving down the tracks. The first thing we do is, you're going to construct the shoe fly. Then you can construct the portal once you have the trains moved to the shoe fly. And in this configuration, as we pointed out there, the Stanford game day platform would no longer be in this proper alignment. Because of the shoe fly construction, we do limit access to numerous properties, and those are what was shown in red there as being property acquisitions likely because you no longer have ingress and egress to those properties. The first action is to remove the vegetation. You have to do some property acquisitions. We're going to have to temporarily close Alma. And those streets that access onto Alma would also have no longer have access onto Alma. There'd be cul-de-sacs or dead ends. Now we pulled up our temporary fences, construct the shoe fly, and once the shoe fly is constructed, we divert the Caltrain trains to the shoe fly, and this allows us to open up the area so that we can start the construction of the. So the other thing here that was pointed out is because we're going to have this trench right now in the Embarcadero, that we'd have to reconfigure the Embarcadero underpass. And you start to come down into the pit, and then now at this point right here is that is the actual portal for where your actual boring machine starts boring. And John will talk a little bit about the criteria here. We assumed for this analysis that we'd have twin bore tunnels. And John referred to is, the width is 100 feet with a depth of 40, and he'll go into a little detail. And then this is what John was talking about, is that after you're done with the boring, we can come back, and as far as possible, we can put a cover on. But at what point you get to the vertical clearance, then it's going to be an open trench for there. And then we do, because of the width of the portal there, that you have a necking down of Alma Street. And again, mentioned Embarcadero reconfiguration. So,
all right, so clarifying questions? Anything you want to revisit? Yes, Greg.
Sorry.
Greg, and then Nadia.
The stupid question, why do you have to take properties for this? I mean, like in 2 sentences, if someone asked me.
No driveway.
Because people don't believe anything, so.
Primarily, when we cut off access where you can't actually get to and from a property, that is considered an acquisition because you've now impeded the property owner from accessing their property.
Also, the fencing for the shoe fly, when you get down to the 100-foot wide pit, is approximately 10 feet from the person's house. So, I mean, it goes into their property significantly. It's not just cutting off the access.
Okay, thank you.
Tony and Nadia,
So,
did you still have your hand up?
On that issue, wouldn't a single bore solve that problem?
Well, I'll jump in. So a single bore means a much bigger diameter tunnel, which means we have to go deeper. And the tunnel diameter, so the dual board actually gives you a smaller footprint as far as the width and depth, but it means we also have to go much deeper in a single bore, which means we have to get the profile of the train down. So it pushes out the length of the.
You're beyond the city limits.
We're beyond the city limits. I don't know.
And one other.
Also, you'd be beyond Churchill too. So, yeah.
Okay.
Another
and
question.
Follow up, and then Nadia.
The shoe fly seems to require closure of Embarcadero, or you got to dig deeper.
We didn't actually look into the solution for Embarcadero. It's either a closure or a reconfiguration before you start the construction of the portal. which you would, right now Embarcadero is an underpass, the road goes underneath the tracks, and the reconfigured, the road would have to go over the tracks in some configuration of some sort.
I like that comment. I'm going to put that in the minute. Ooh. Is that an EWW or? Ouch. Okay, Nadia.
So I'll do a question, and then when you're ready for comments, I'm happy to do that. But you had mentioned the last time that we're waiting for Caltrain to give you the specs on electrified-only trains because they're still working on their
Yeah, we have not
stuff.
received anything from Caltrain.
Do you have any signs of life? The Mars rover died, but how is it going for you?
I have asked, but we have not received.
Okay. All right, Sam, maybe you can do that on your way out. You can prompt them, Rob. One more time, maybe a little stronger. Okay, is it, David, you want?
I have to ask, but how does Churchill avoid any property takings? Every other street there seems to have property takes except for Churchill.
Well, we're coming, you want John?
Well, you're in the bore by the time you're Churchill.
But Coleridge after that has takings.
What was that now?
Coleridge, the road after Churchill, has takings.
I don't.
That must be for the shoe fly, because the shoe fly goes beyond the portal and then swings back in again. It's the shoe fly that's impacting it.
So yeah, the question then still is, how does Churchill escape takings?
Is that one of the streets that has the driveway on Churchill?
Yeah.
Say that again?
Is that one of the streets that has the driveway on Churchill instead of Alma? I know that there were some areas like that. Maybe that was one of them?
I'm pretty sure.
The corner, both corner houses, I think, go into Churchill.
For sure,
Yeah, I don't think
Yeah,
any
they
of the
do. I drove
driveways
it
are on
today, as a
Alma.
matter
That's
of
the
fact.
problem with the other
But on
properties.
the other
big blue
streets, they
house
have them
does
onto
for
Alma?
sure.
On those corner houses?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
they go this
Their
way
driveways are
versus
on
this
Alma.
way.
Interesting.
Yeah, I drove that today and looked, as a matter of fact. Okay, anything else? Yes, Mander.
Can I have a question? So we talking about these shoe flies and such and property takings and such. Have we thought about going up for a shoe fly? Like we're talking about building hybrids, viaducts and all these things. So is there a temporary way?
So a
of going-
viaduct shoe fly.
Yes.
Okay.
Or something like
Interesting.
that. That's one of our favorites.
that-
options here, so.
Is that?
We have not looked at it, but just on a first level is like when we're doing a shoe fly at grade, we're only swinging, so we're only doing a horizontal shift. But when you start going up, we're starting having to look at it will probably make the shoe fly longer. Is that it?
Right. And then that's, to be aerial and to avoid Alma, I mean, the pit itself takes out Alma. So it's not just the shoe fly that's taking out Alma. It's, the pit takes, 2/3 of the width of Alma.
Yeah.
So how big is the tunnel diameter again?
34 feet outside diameter.
The inside, what's the
The
inside?
inside is 32. It's 30.
Okay, so comment for the record for the city to ask. Caltrain Electrification EIR states that when they put wires on the historic bridge, the clearance will be 19 feet. That is what freight will run on, that is what Caltrain will run on. So if their clearance is 19 feet,
Right. That clearance is to the wire. Okay, it's not clearance to the bridge above. It's to the wire.
yes,
So
but-
that's, right now we've got 22 feet to the wire, and then we have another 3 feet for the system that, houses the wire and so forth. So that's where we are.
no, I mean, I know why you're working with the requirements that you have. What I'm asking is that my city push back on why the requirements are what they are, because that historic bridge has not just wires on it, but has actually a metal crossbar that goes over the top. And so, and those requirements come, as you know, from high-speed rail. And what I've talked to high-speed rail experts on is that actually they're sort of overblown because they make money the more, the larger things are. And we have a constraint here on the peninsula. And so here we're obviously talking about a tunnel, and this doesn't matter for necessarily all the cities, but if we can reduce the cost overall in any which way, no matter what type of thing, by looking at those numbers, it matters. And so I think the city should actually make a request, or at least a very technical clarifying question about if the wires are down to 19 feet, why are we using an assumption of 30 feet, right?
So let me,
Our wire is 22 feet in the tunnel. So it's 3 feet difference is what we're talking about.
I appreciate that, but 3 feet, but we're going more than a mile or whatever, I mean, it's just a lot of dirt, right? And I know that it's a small number, we've talked about this before, but, I mean, as you have seen time and again, and I know the staff is perplexed, like, people really want to make this thing work. And so they're fighting for every inch. And to the extent that there is already a technical reason why there's a pinch point, then it's fair to question, well, hey, can we look at reducing those costs? So.
So to that matter is the Caltrain, you'd have to get a design exception for that, and which was what they went through in the EIR. They got a design exception for that. And so they went through that process. Caltrain still needs to tell us what that process is, but unless you have in my experience on design exceptions, unless you have a compelling safety reason, they usually will not grant you a design exception. They do not grant design exceptions based solely on cost. So anyhow, that's just been my experience with Caltrans and other agencies, whether it's BART or anything. So you have to have a compelling reason other than cost.
But I think the point Nadia's making is if the city were to get that in writing and help people understand whether it's in play or not in play, you think you're trying to help
Yeah, I don't
clarify.
think it'll make a material difference in cost necessarily,
so-
but.
Question about the.
Oh, wait, you
I'm
just
sorry.
cut off Rob,
Yeah,
so let's let Rob finish.
I know we've got to get to some other things too,
Yes.
and we're not going to make a decision on the tunnel today, but the council has to make a decision about whether to proceed with the tunnel, and it's a really hard decision because a lot of people like it, and I get why. It's great. If we could do it, right, to have a tunnel and be able to recapture that land, and it was be awesome. But here's the deal, is that it is practically not possible. I mean, in terms of the cost is crazy. It's like $3 to $4 billion to do this. And then the construction impacts on properties and this community is enormous. And so I do think that the council needs some support here from other citizens that are willing to say, yeah, it sounds great, it would be great if we could do it, but really, we've taken a look at it, and it's just not practical, and we shouldn't proceed. And we've been saying that, and unless you disagree with that, you think actually practically we can do it, then you should explain that, because I don't see it.
So my question is about the property takings. I heard that one case, the shoe fly tracks go up to within 10 feet of the property. But the properties themselves do not need to be demolished for construction, do they?
So no, I think that you're getting way down the stream, but in my experience doing Route 85, where we had situations like this, we owned the properties, we purchased them because the people couldn't live in them for the 5 years, and then we literally resold them. We reconfigured the driveway, or you can, do something different and higher density or whatever is the right thing at the end, but they can't live in them while they can't access them.
Understood. My
Yeah,
question
so
was about-
we haven't crossed that bridge, but
Okay.
yeah. Okay, let's get back to Rob's point. I want to spend about 4 minutes on this, and we do need to move on. I also want to make sure we get the question answered while we're on this topic about the process. So that was a big question that people had. So help Rob understand, other than, yeah, it would be great, especially if we could wave a wand and just make it happen. I think all of us understand that. What's your thinking about why the tunnel maybe sticks?
So I'll take a stab. So I think when we thought about swapping the order of operations of having Meadow and Charleston conversation first and putting the citywide tunnel second, I guess we didn't really think about procedurally how that kind of drew out the ability to be able to eliminate that option sooner. And so even though we've seen this video, most Palo Altans, according to all the surveys we've done previously, I think really want this. And so I don't think it's a matter of I don't think you're going to show this video and people are still going to want the tunnel. But I do think you had to have a full community meeting about the tunnel. And you couldn't have canceled that at a city council level because the community would have been blindsided. And so the reason I made the point earlier of had the CAP seen this thing sooner, we actually could have played the role that you're asking us to sort of do now, which is to offer the council support. Because even if we had seen early sketches before it went to, there was obviously a point between the initial sketch we saw in August and before the making of that video that would have shown us, even from an aerial perspective, look, you have this blowback and this is what it does. And had the CAP seen that sooner, we would have been able to ring the alarm and say, wait a second, I don't know if it's worth going through an entire community process and community meeting on this because you've already got this eminent domain. But, for just the series of unfortunate events, the minute you guys got the video, I appreciate that you sent it to us immediately and it made it out. But at that point, nobody could go to the city council and say, yeah, you should take it out tonight, because 99% of the people had no idea what we were even talking about. And so I think just from the community process perspective, you had to do that. Now, if you could start to make noise now ahead of the March meeting of like, look, not just the tunnel video, but here's all the engineering specs, because you will get the questions that I'm saying about the clearance heights, and you're going to get the questions about the other stuff. I think that's important. I think the other thing that that hasn't been hammered home enough when it comes to the citywide tunnel problem is the station. We have not talked about the impacts of California Avenue Station. And when people appreciate that you've now talking about undergrounding that station, and we had one visual about it, like kind of in the beginning, and then that conversation went away, people will really understand. And the other thing is even talking about the kind of service that we would get at Cal Ave and how much larger that station might need to be. Because people imagine, well, it's kind of a small station, right? We don't have a lot of people now. Well, if Caltrain is going to double the number of people, that's goes from whatever, 1,200 to 2,400 or 3,000 people going. So I think if you make the argument about the station, if you make, it's certainly why CARD recommended just looking at a South Palo Alto only tunnel. And, you know, despite the fact that there clearly may now be, now that we understand the tunnel portals, I think that helps. But it was to eliminate the station, because the station is the problem, right?
Okay,
And so-
others? I'm sorry to cut you off, but when I said 4, I hoped it could get spread around. Okay, Phil, and then I really do want to call on some people who haven't spoken so much.
With the Cal Ave station, it's not the traffic volumes, it's the length of the platforms to accommodate longer Caltrain trains.
But the question we're on the table is, why do people still want the tunnel?
Just clarify.
Okay. Do we have some feedback on that? Parag?
I mean, just my thoughts, right? If you take it back to the community, this is something that they don't want. And, you know, my obvious retort would be, can we get a second opinion? It's like pulling out my teeth, right? I want a second opinion.
Okay,
that
all right, I'm going to move us on and ask you, if you would, to talk about the process. What is the process now? I think to be respectful of Nadia's comment about had we known and whatever, there was an earlier comment, as somebody said, people are concerned and curious about what is the process from now on about all the alternatives in the mix. And maybe that's something we can also put into the mix and then take one more round of comments and then move on to the Churchill pedestrian crossing.
Do you want to go to Tony first, or?
Tony?
So I've been a huge proponent of this tunnel for about 10 years, mainly because the poor cities in developing countries do tunnels, and we cannot, but maybe we should outsource it. The question that I have is these numbers. I've heard numbers from about 2 billion to 2.5 billion, and that's like, oh, we cannot afford that. But you're coming up with numbers like 3 to 4 billion. So if you can sort of harden those numbers, it'll convince most Palo Altans, I think.
Okay, we'll get that maybe for March. Will we be able to get a number for our March meeting, CAP meeting? Yep, we'll try and work on that. Thank you, Tony. All right, I do want to.
Order of magnitude.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be a range. All of our numbers we've shown so far will be a range. Okay, can you speak to process?
Yeah, and I appreciate the feedback. It's very helpful, and I do think that, you know, probably removing the tunnel in January was not likely, sort of in retrospect, and we have to go through this community process, and we will, and we'll finish that study. But even after that, that tough decision still needs to be made by council, and that's where we're going to need your help and others to really give a fair and reasonable opinion about whether we should proceed or not. And the council's going to need more citizen voices on that topic, and so that'll happen in, you know, April, I think, is when we'll see that, and there'll be additional meetings in March. Megan?
I just wanted to say that it's called citywide. I think people are still going to be confused about why it doesn't start at Palo Alto Avenue or at the historic rail bridge or whatever, right? And so, like, literally just a drawing of, like, down, 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 down X because there's a station right here or whatever it is to explain to people why the video starts where it does.
That's a great point. Okay. All right, I'm going to move us on. We need to do this Churchill, and we still have our traffic to do, and I want to make sure we get time to do that. Is there one final comment, Nadia?
I was just going to say, name it the 3/4 wide tunnel or whatever city.
Well, I was trying to say within city limits, but this was the moniker that was attached to it
From Josh, probably. Okay. All right. Hugh, you're on. We're talking about briefly the Churchill, because I want to make plenty of time for Ruta and Nayan, because they have a lot of information to share as well. It's really good we did push the financial. Okay. Hugh, you're on. All right, trade.
Excellent. Okay,
Thank you for being here.
try to be brief and yet give the whole story.
Yeah, please do. And we will have time for questions.
Thanks. So, we wanted to look, kind of switching gears here at what would happen at Churchill. Obviously, the discussion is closing that for vehicles, and how would you maintain that for bicyclists and pedestrians getting through. We know there's a lot of traffic. So just broadly, we looked at where all the crossings are now that you can make as a bicyclist and a pedestrian, those that are open and those that are underpasses and one thing and another. So that's on this first map, and you can kind of see the zoom in area. And if we zoom into that, so this is in the Churchill area, and this map shows you from the Homer Tunnel essentially down to the California Drive Tunnel, so you can get a sense of sort of where that sits, kind of halfway in between. Also acknowledges that there's work ongoing at Embarcadero Road that's been proposed. That's not completed, it's not funded yet, but just so that you're kind of aware of that. And on both the prior map and this map, the red lines are intended to show where, some of the kind of higher stress, more challenging streets are for people who are biking and walking, the bigger streets that are harder to cross at any rate. So, trying to fit, if you think of these sort of as like drainages, trying to make sure you fit travel ways within those so that people don't necessarily have to cross those to get to a safe place to cross the Caltrain tracks. This is, I guess, mostly for our Safe Routes meeting the other week, but just to acknowledge the work that Palo Alto has done on looking at how people walk and bike to school in the community. And of course, you have among the highest rates of walking and biking to school in California and in the US, which is really impressive. And there's a lot of thought that's been put into how can you safely walk and bike. So, we're trying to make sure we're thinking about these options in the context of the fact that, who's using them and for what purposes. And of course, just to acknowledge that we know there are a lot of people using this now. Tons and tons of people walking and biking through here now. These are the counts, which we'll be talking about these more in a minute, so maybe we don't want to focus on these now, but they do sort of verify what's in those images you saw, which is that there are a ton of school kids coming through here, as well as other users.
I'm going to actually ask, we're not traffic engineers, so I look at these numbers, and what I don't know is what's a lot?
What's a lot?
Like what's heavy traffic, light traffic, hardly any at all?
So I think maybe we save that question for when our traffic engineers come up and talk about that, then they can talk about the full spectrum of that. But when you have 100 bicyclists moving through an intersection, that's a lot. I'll tell you from, often we'll have 10 or 258 for that matter.
That's a real lot.
Yeah.
Okay,
Nadia. Real lot.
Could you go back to the Safe Routes to School slide for just a second?
Sure.
Yeah, so my question is, there had been some discussion at some point, and I believe it was in the original rail corridor study from 2014, about potentially having a bike ped crossing at Seal, because Seal is...
Great question.
Yeah, and so it could go into Pierce Park.
Great
and it
question.
actually serves a better connection to Stanford Ave and the campus and VMware, and it works for the middle school.
Right. So we looked at that as well. We started to look at that as well. And we've really kind of delved into that completely, but we've acknowledged that that's an option. I think essentially, Churchill or Seal are options potentially into Pierce Park. So we haven't really delved into that specifically how that work. The advantage there is that the angling of the tunnel and stuff like that is probably superior. You have the park. If you think about California, right? It's nice because you have this big space to put a tunnel in that you don't have in Churchill. So yeah, there are definitely some advantages. If you remember back to that map a couple slides ago, it shades it kind of further away from that sort of midpoint of the tunnel, but not so far.
Could you go back to that slide then? So, because you also will still maintain Embarcadero. So Embarcadero still is a bike ped crossing, and actually having it at Pierce Park is about equidistant from the next one, which is the Cal Ave underpass.
If you do a citywide tunnel, right?
Well, yeah, forget the citywide tunnel for just a second. They're skeptics. I don't know if you heard. But the Seal one would put another basically halfway between the next undercrossing, which is Cal Ave.
Yep. Definitely has some advantages.
Okay, let's keep going, because I want to make sure you get all your slides out.
Okay, yeah, I think we can push through these now pretty quickly. So this just says, we'll close it to vehicles, construct a bicycle pedestrian crossing, if we're looking at Churchill, so this is kind of just considering the Churchill, not yet considering Seal, although you'll see that as a location option under here, you know, do we want to think about crossing just the railroad, also crossing Alma, which is a desire for a lot of folks? There are a lot of challenges with doing that, honestly. And then is there a combination of one or two, those items, one or two, where you also raise up the tracks a little bit? So it's more like Homer, where the tracks are actually raised. They're not fully raised, obviously, but they're raised somewhat compared to, you know, the sort of relatively even profile with Alma Street at the Churchill location. That, of course, is quite expensive because you're now essentially doing a partial separation, right? So anyway, and then of course Churchill, Seal. We also talked about the Embarcadero option on the closer side, but because there's the option on the further side, we just chose to move on from that. Yep, let's go on. And then just to kind of show you what those potential options are. Again, this is very high level, kind of sketch level, which is to say, and I think this animates in some things, right? So one option, right, is to do just a crossing of the tracks, not crossing Alma. So you would essentially start from where that gray box is, where the closure is happening, you know, ramp down, go across and under, and ramp back up. That's probably the simplest of the options. The second option is the purple line, which essentially runs down the middle of Churchill Avenue. And on the eastern side of Alma, that is quite challenging in certain ways. You have a lot of houses there. You know, there are constraints. You would put that in the middle of the street, essentially, which creates certain kinds of challenges. On the western side, because of the school and the lack of driveways, that's actually pretty straightforward and kind of convenient. So that's not a major issue. But on the eastern side, you are dealing with people's houses and properties. There's a potential opportunity to think about the tree lawn area that's there and whether or not that could be to make the tunnel a little wider, but you know, that would of course remove the tree lawn. You would have to take away parking to make that happen for the distance that, roughly the distance you see. So about 6 to 8 houses would lose their parking. And the third option, as I say, is to combine one of those with a slightly raised profile of the tracks.
Okay, let's hold questions. We have several more slides, and then I will promise I'll start with you, David. Okay, let's keep going.
And then, so just pros and cons, obviously for that one that goes under, that stays just on the tracks or just goes under the tracks, you know, not that much impact on utilities and properties, relatively short undercrossing. The ramps are going to be the kind of length of the ramps, whatever they are, but, you know, you don't have to cross under both the street and the railroad tracks. You know, for option 2, you get the benefit of being able to avoid, like you do with California, being able to avoid crossing both the street and the railroad, which is of course quite nice for folks. But you know, there is a light there, so there's potentially ways to maybe improve that experience with option 1 as well. We would need to look on option 1 about the potential impact to the existing bike path. It seems like that can probably work, but a little more detailed work would need to be done there. There's potential need for property acquisition. So those are all things I think we need to look into a little bit more. And then option 2, really, it's the length and the width. If you're really fitting within the existing street profile, then it's, you know, a 10-foot wide tunnel, which is sort of the minimum standard that we would propose for that. But given the length of it, that's pretty narrow, and that's a kind of concern. And then, as I say, some street parking would be lost. And then option 3, you know, has shorter ramps and stairs, has some advantages, but, you know, much more significant cost.
And then you had a couple more slides about pictures, and then we'll open it to David.
Yeah, these are just examples, so I think we can look at these as needed, maybe just open to comments now.
Okay, David, you have the floor.
For option 2 on Churchill, you said you would start the underpass in the middle of Churchill?
Yeah, so to make that work, given access to driveways, you would need the underpass to be like right in the middle of the street, essentially.
So that would mean the closure of Churchill on that side to Alma at all?
Nope, it would still be open. So that, you know, if you imagine the underpass kind of coming down the middle of the street and then vehicles traveling on either side of it. So
bikes would have to figure out how to get to the middle somehow.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, you know, Churchill is not maybe, you can't go across right there anymore then, so it's not it essentially dead ends into Alma. It's, you know, becomes a little bit less busy of a street. I think there are ways to make that work, you know, for bicyclists to make that an acceptable crossing, but certainly that, I can see the concern.
Well, one thing that we've tossed around, which we haven't talked about in any of these yet, is actually closing Churchill on our side, which would potentially give you a huge opportunity to create a bike ped going down, because cars would never have to go. But anyway, that's something different.
You could do that as well. And, I think obviously there's certain disadvantages to that and certain advantages to that. The one thing that you don't necessarily gain if you do that is the ability to shorten the tunnel that much. We'd have to look into that a little bit. We did try to look at an option, if you could talk to this a little better, where we, put a little tighter ramp in, but, at that point you've got people making multiple switchbacks and, is that a desirable experience is something we, want to be cautious of.
Okay, other comments? And I see Etty putting her light on. How many of you want to have questions or comments on this topic? Okay, I see a person from the audience, and I see Nadia. Okay, Etty.
I just wanted a clarification. What did you mean by close Churchill on our side?
Oh, I live on the side that's not the tracks, so
east side, okay.
we had tossed around an idea a long time ago.
East side, okay.
Yeah.
So you can no longer get to Alma from Churchill.
But anyway.
Okay, Nadia?
So can you
And then if you would go to
clarify what the process is going to be about, whether we're just going to look at options for Churchill or whether we will also include options for Seal for the council to consider moving forward in terms of a place to put a bike crossing?
I think we're still early in the process of looking at both of those as alternatives, and we'll have to evaluate the pros and cons and the advantages of each. So,
But is Seal an option that will be looked at? That's what I'm saying, because I
believe it will be, yeah.
Is it in your scope to look at it?
I think really it's just how many options do you want to be considered, and that's
I think there's enough evidence and that this should be looked at. There's some significant advantages to that. Well, there are advantages to that particular location, so we ought to take a look at it.
All right, I'm writing yes, it will be considered. That will be in the minutes. Okay, yes, sir. You have to turn it on.
Got it. Rob
Thank
Levitsky
you.
here.
Hi, Rob.
1200 Emerson. I think you guys have jumped the gun a bit about closing Churchill. The council has not voted to close Churchill. There's been some discussion of partial closure. But I believe it doesn't make a lot of sense to close it. For one, Christine, we don't have 6 cycles back up like you might have on Charleston. And what we do have is a maximum right now of 10 trains per hour. Now, a lot of times during the day, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, there's one train in each direction. That means the gates are down for 45 seconds north, 45 seconds south, 1.5 minutes out of 60 minutes. So you have 58.5 minutes a day where there's no trains whatsoever, and you're talking about closing the tracks. And this is closing the tracks to emergency vehicles. This is closing the tracks to people who want to go across the tracks. In the afternoons, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, about 400 cars an hour cross at Churchill. By closing that, you're going to send those cars to Oregon or Embarcadero, and the idea is you'll just dump the problem onto somebody else. And the council has said that's not fair to just close it to make Churchill a nice dead-end street for some people who live there and send all those cars who need to cross every afternoon or every morning to Embarcadero or to Oregon or some other place. Most right now there's 10 trains per hour, and that's from 7 to 9 a.m., 5 to 7 p.m. 5 trains north, 5 trains south. They're talking about in 2022 going to, hold on, 6 trains north and 6 trains south. Another 90 seconds. So you go from 10 trains, which is 45 seconds times 10 is 450 seconds, which is 7.5 minutes right now. So you have 52.5 minutes of no trains, even at the worst case right now, and that'll go to 7.5 minutes. It'll go to 9 minutes. So you'd have 51 minutes of no trains. And it's not a collapsed situation where the gates are down and nobody crosses.
Okay,
So,
thank you. Do you have anything else to add?
no, that'll do.
Okay, thank you.
I just want you to know that it's not just generally accepted that we're closing the tracks and moving on with all these concepts.
No, great. And you've done a perfect job of setting up Nyan, who I'm going to ask to take the podium. And please go through your presentation as quickly as possible so we have plenty of time for the public and the CAP members to learn about the traffic study. Okay, we have one more on, I guess.
Just a small comment, could we break option 3 out into options 3 and 4? So if we clarify this idea of like raising the tracks at one location and a separate location, because I was very confused reading through this.
It is confusing.
Yeah, so just 3 into 3 and 4.
Okay. Yes, sir, yes, go ahead. Get up there. If you need to talk, please, we're in the lightning round. I've got 25 minutes.
So I work at Pali. I live at Emerson and Embarcadero. I make that commute all the time. We do need to keep Pali kids really safe, all our kids safe, all our pedestrian and bikes. If you go to Seal, and that ends up working out, Embarcadero will get more traffic even on its bike path. And that project that you have dotted has been, talked about by the council, but hasn't been agreed upon. And so we really want to see that project happen. The problem is, and I'll be interested to hear the traffic information, if you do close Churchill, that will drive more traffic. People who are going north on Alma, who want to access Embarcadero, will make a ride on Lincoln and make a ride on Emerson and run right into this bike path. So you might solve a problem on Churchill, which is great. We need to solve that problem. But this problem is, you're going to have maybe another problem with bikes and pedestrians getting run into or having, there's already accidents almost happen all the time. I almost got run over the other day. So please just keep that in mind. It has to be a coordinated area plan. That's what we're asking for. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Nyan, please.
Well, as we all know, the City of Palo Alto in this room is considering to provide.
You need to get closer to your mic and you need to speak up.
Considering to provide a great separation to enhance the safety and operations for all modes of transportation, right? And as usual on every project, traffic is always a big concern. So city is conducting a big traffic study to evaluate the impacts of the alternatives that are on the table, which include some permanent closure as well as closures during construction. As a part of the traffic study, we collected a lot of data based on the feedback what we got from the community meetings as well as from the GAP. In the past, we are going to be evaluating the existing conditions with the alternatives and future conditions also with the alternatives. And if there are any impacts because of any of the closures or during construction, we would be developing recommendations. As a part of the data collection, we collected 7-day, 24-hour bidirectional traffic volumes, which were conducted on Wednesday, November 28th through December 4th. Turning movement counts at the study intersections were collected, which included pedestrian, bicycle, vehicular traffic during the AM and PM peak hours. We also collected the signal timing sheets or the signal timing data from City of Palo Alto. Here's an overview of the study intersections which we are going to be evaluating for the closure of Churchill Avenue. And these are the intersections which were determined based on the consensus between the city staff, the CAP, as well as the feedback what we received from the community. Locations of the 24-hour traffic volumes as well as on the figure, it provides illustration on the 24-hour bidirectional traffic volume at the segments of the roadway where the traffic volumes were collected. Next slide. Based on the data what we collected, we analyzed the existing condition analysis, and based on the city as well as the VTA CMP standards, out of the 24 intersections that were evaluated for existing conditions for the closure of Churchill Avenue, 8 of them are operating at an acceptable level of service during one of the peak hours. Alma Lincoln, Alma Barcadero, Alma Kingsley, Churchill, Barcadero and Cooper, El Camino and Churchill, Alma Oregon Expressway westbound off-ramp, and Alma and Oregon Expressway eastbound off-ramp. Those are the 8 intersections which under existing conditions, they are operating below the acceptable thresholds. A figure illustrating the intersection locations which are operating at unacceptable. Next slide. We also did origin and destination analysis throughout the study area using a streetlight data, and we developed 18 origin and destination zones to determine where the traffic within the study area is coming from and where is it headed. The data, what was analyzed, it included the AM peak period between 6 and 10 and the PM peak period between 3 to 7. During the AM peak period, what we found that approximately 42% of the sample trips that were in the study area originated from Stanford Avenue west of El Camino Real, about approximately 16%, Barcadero Road east of Middlefield, that included approximately 15%, and Waverly north of Barcadero was approximately 11%. And approximately 65% of the captured trips, they were destined. It included Barcadero Road east of Middlefield, Page Mill, and Alma Street.
Sorry. I just want to add one thing, that this origin destination was done with respect to using Churchill Ave only. It's, yeah, so all these percentages are actually using Churchill as probably a cut through or to go to their house or whatever it is, but these percentages are on Churchill.
So we definitely want to fix this slide before you post it.
Yeah. It does say on the previous slide.
Yeah, so let's put it in the header in the green.
And can I just point of clarification? So for example, on the slide, on this one that has the pictures, when it has 295 people going across Churchill, this represents where those people, the origin and destination of those people are generally? Is that?
So this is a sample size which cannot be directly compared with the peak period counts that we have taken.
Okay.
Right? This is an overall sample size for the 4 hours that Nayan had just mentioned in the previous.
Okay.
But if we want to convert it, then we would have to take that number and multiply by that percentage to give you exact number for that particular hour. Make sense?
Yeah. I'll hold my comment till afterwards, but.
Okay, let's keep going.
So here's an illustration of the overall origin and destination analysis, where the traffic on Churchill is coming from and where is it headed to. The numbers in the blue, they are the origin numbers, and the one in the red, they are basically the destination numbers. Next slide.
Hard to read.
During the PM peak period, the traffic coming onto Churchill, approximately 37% of the sample that was collected, it originated either on Alma, Barcadero, or El Camino Real, and 63% of the captured traffic was destined to Barcadero, Alma, or Cooper Street.
And this is Churchill only?
Churchill only.
Okay, just making it on my slide.
Figure illustrating the PM OD analysis. Next slide. So with that, what are the next steps of the traffic study? We're going to be projecting the future traffic demands for the future conditions using the VTA and City of Palo Alto travel demand model, which is in progress. Once we have completed the projection of the future demands, we would be projecting the diversion in traffic due to the closure of Churchill based on the travel demand model, and evaluate the existing and the future conditions with alternatives. And as I've said earlier, that if there are any impacts, we will be developing recommendations to minimize the impacts to the best.
And those will be available at the March 13th CAP meeting?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Open for questions?
Before we proceed, sorry. So we did compare the VTA model with the Palo Alto travel demand model, and they are pretty same, but we are basing all our analysis on Palo Alto travel demand model because, we did take care of those restricted movements which are not being replicated in VTA. So as far as the VTA model is concerned, we are just comparing it to make sure that Palo Alto travel demand model does compare exactly with the VTA model, but we are proceeding with Palo Alto travel demand model.
So VTA is kind of your doctor's second opinion? Yes. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go this way. Anybody on this side? Greg, did you have questions for the team? Chris, Parag, Tony, Phil?
Brief question.
Okay. Phil, you got the floor, and then I'll get to
Does the future traffic demand reflect continued commercial development in downtown Palo Alto or elsewhere in Palo Alto?
The future travel demand would include the future land uses that are within the general plan. or any specific plan as per the last update.
So anything that's been approved,
That's correct.
whether it's in the formal general plan or any specific plan.
So the city council just lifted development caps for downtown.
That would not be included
Okay.
in the travel demand model.
I understand correct.
Okay, Nadia?
So we had requested in the past that the raw data for all of this be posted. Will that happen?
Yes.
Great, thank you. And then,
Let's get a date on that.
yes.
When can we have that?
We can get all the turning moment counts, 24-hour counts, and the OD data that was collected on the website by the end of this week.
Well, isn't that included in your existing conditions report?
It
So I
is.
would post that when we post that, after we've incorporated the city comments, that's when
Sure.
I'll post that.
Okay, so
If,
what's our,
it-
end of
when
the
will
month?
that, when, is that
End of the
before the next CAP meeting or when?
Yes, I'm
Yeah,
sure
it'll
it
be
will.
before the next CAP meeting, because the city's engineers are still looking at it, and they do have some comments for the report, so by the next CAP meeting. you'll have-
So it'll be included as an appendix to the entire report,
The existing conditions.
the existing petitions report. And so we'll send out a link. I'm looking at Chantel, who's not there. We'll send out a link. I put a little action item. We'll send a link when that gets posted. Okay, Nadia, do you have any other questions?
Well, so a few things. I have lots of questions, but in the interest of time, if I email those questions, should I email the entire group and can we get confirmation that we'll get a written answer back? Is that faster?
Yeah, I
'Cause
think
I've got
that
lots
might
of
be,
technical
yeah, I
stuff.
think that would be great.
So just at a high level, this page, I don't know what to call it because it's not numbered, this one.
Yeah. That's called the traffic counts.
Thank you, traffic counts page, see? We have 7:30 to 9:30, but as I know we've discussed, there's actually, if you're on Churchill westbound, there is a limit on turns that exists that cars between 7:30 and 8:15 actually are not supposed to go across. So I think it would be helpful, I appreciate that we've looked at kind of the narrow windows of time, but it might be helpful to actually broaden this up to 6:30. And the reason is there's also traffic related to Stanford that I think would be useful for the city to capture for other reasons. One of the concerns is, of course, the GUP expansion and whatever. And if you're trying to figure out how many Stanford people use that intersection at peak hour, then that would be useful for the city for other purposes. So I would just highlight that.
Nadia, that's a good point. What I would suggest is we collected 24-hour counts also. And the period, the count period, the 2-hour period that was selected was based on the 24-hour counts. So within the AM peak period, 7:30 to 9:30 was the worst traffic along
Right.
that roadway segment. So that's why it was elected to take the turning moment counts between 7:30 and 9:30.
Yep.
Even though we did that for the 2 hours, as you can see it, the count was being represented is only between 8 to 9. So 7:30 to 8 o'clock, even when we look at the 15-minute intervals, it
Right.
did not add up to the worst condition during the AM peak period.
Okay.
But what we can do is, if you are interested in it, once we get you the 24-hour counts, you would be able to see it, the difference between the 8 to 9 and to 7 to 8 and 6 to 7.
So I think it's super helpful because, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm reading in this data is that most of the people who are going across, who are using this intersection, are using this to get on and off of Alma. There's not a lot of people, if you look at the numbers that are on the right column of where it says Alma and Churchill, there's really only 91 people coming across from, or 81 people, I can't see, I don't have my glasses, coming from sort of the Stanford side and going eastbound. So when we talk about the concerns about a closure and how many more people are now going to be traveling eastbound, really, most of these people, there's 150 people turning right, 89 people turning left, and then off of Alma, people are turning on to Churchill. But people are using this to get on and off of Alma. They're not using it to go through. And so the question is, that's correct? Okay. Well, they're in Embarcadero, but if you close Churchill and now people go on to Embarcadero, people again will not be using Embarcadero to travel further on Embarcadero. They are still going to want to turn to get onto Alma. And so the real issue that we're going to have is how people are going to turn on and off of Embarcadero, and not that you would need to widen Embarcadero further down because people are continuing towards Middlefield. And I think that is something that if we could highlight that as something that is evidenced from the data would be helpful. The second thing that I think is...
That one would be, once we do the travel demand model. Once we close Churchill, the gravity model is going to tell us where the traffic is going to be headed. And you bring a very good point that if we close that, and if that's what the travel patterns are, which, like as Ruth has said, that one of the reasons why we are using the Palo Alto model is because of the closures and everything what we need to take into account. It's replicating the travel patterns in the travel demand model to what was observed out in the field based on the origin and destination. So it would tell us how those movements are going to take place under the alternative when Churchill is closed. So we will be bringing back to at the next CAP meeting what we find where the diversion of the traffic is going to occur and how those movements are going to be replaced.
Well, and the next question I have is, so we're doing 24-hour averages, which includes the weekends, correct?
No.
Okay.
So we collected a 7-day counts, but for the purpose of analysis during a weekday, we are only taking Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday.
Okay.
We are ignoring the rest of the time period.
Okay. Because it seems to me like I don't really care what's happening on Churchill at 11 p.m. We only really care about what's happening at the worst hours, right?
That's
and
correct.
so with the streetlight data, I understand it's not correlated to what you did on this slide, but it'd be important to understand, did you delimit that also then to the same hours or the same days?
As I mentioned earlier, that the origin and destination analysis what we conducted, it was for the same days, through the same time period, like as I said, 6 o'clock in the morning to 10 o'clock, and then, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was 3 o'clock to 7 in the evening.
Okay. All right, let's move on. I've got other people who want to speak. Megan, David, go ahead. Ruta, yes?
We are on this figure. So you see the bicycle and pedestrian counts, right? But at the same time, there are a lot of bicyclists using the crosswalks. So we are going to give you 2 counts on the crosswalk, which would kind of signify which one is the pedestrian and which is the bike. So that will be updated.
And Hugh is nodding that that's appropriate. Okay, I'm going to have Megan and then David and Mander, and then we'll go to, are there people from the audience who want to speak to this item? So I want to make sure I budget time for you all. Okay, Rachel? Anybody else? Okay. No. Okay, and Barbara. Okay, Megan?
Yeah, so I'm not sure whether the goal of these visualizations is sort of to be shared with the public or whether it's sort of more.
Not yet, no.
Okay.
Not public.
Yeah. So I think the loss of service one is really great to like highlight which intersections are the worst ones. But I do think the origin and destination one could use a little work. Maybe you have like little dots for like OD zones, but just sort of better visual representation of that. And as Eileen sort of mentioned as she was like, trying to read it, like just sort of making it more readable, I think would improve.
Megan, you bring a really good point. I think since we did the origin and destination, this might be the 5th or 6th version of it that the city staff might have seen it. We have been every time we try to update it. We have tried to be more creative on how we can present the results best. Any suggestions on it to take it to the public or to the community, please send it over.
Yeah, and these guys did a great job redoing our community brochure earlier, so I trust you all to send us comments and suggestions and sketches, et cetera. So do you have a comment before I go on?
Yeah, even as simple as like breaking it out and being like, this is the origin one, this is the origin one. I don't know.
Anything, we would try it out.
Okay, all right.
And
David?
drawing the zones, yeah, like literally like
Okay.
the polygon of what you mean when you say
Right.
zones.
Yeah, I think that would be very helpful, because people are going to really be drilling in on this. Okay, David?
I had a question about next steps. It says in evaluate, you say conditions with alternatives. So does that mean mitigations, like ideas for mitigations for some of these? Is that what you mean by that, or?
That's correct.
So is there some way we could take a look at that list before you go and actually go and do some calculations?
So in the next steps, what we will be doing is, first we will evaluate with the alternative without any mitigation measures. And then if there are any impacts, we will start looking into options that can help to minimize the impacts, right? And then we will evaluate it. If we can bring or reduce the delay or whatever measure of effectiveness we are trying to do it, we will take it to the city staff and to the CAP. We will bring it to you and then present the results or the improvements that needs to happen under each alternative. And based on the feedback, what we get from the CAP, we will go back to the table and look into the suggestions what we might have got on the improvement.
So, David, do you need like a list of what's even being considered? Because it's things like limiting left turns or turning lefts and adding lanes, or what kinds of things are you thinking are going to be mitigation / solutions?
For right now, we are not looking at anything because we don't know what the impacts are going to be.
But
So
you have a
once-
list that
once
you
we
have a
have-
toolbox generically, regardless of what city you're in, where you kind of go to a list in some sort of order of cost, right?
Yes.
So is that something you can share with us that we could put in the minutes, or?
Sure, we can do that.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
it seems
we can do
like you
that.
would have, first we look and we restripe something, and then that doesn't work when we add something else, and we add 3 of those, and
No, definitely,
and at a
yeah.
certain point, the thing breaks down and becomes another problem.
Sure.
Okay,
We'll
so
do that.
we'll add the generic list to help you understand that, but they can't give you anything ahead of the next meeting, I think is what I'm hearing.
I just wanted to make sure that all bases are covered when those alternatives are evaluated, so
Yeah.
make sure
Sure.
nothing's missed.
So then you can take a look at it. We'll get it in the minutes. Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
Mander, anything from you?
Maybe not yet.
Okay. Barbara, and then Rachel? Because I have another agenda item I need to do before we adjourn. So I see Nadia's hand up as well. Okay, Barbara, you're first.
Thank you. 2 questions. One, would you take the suggestion of doing an actual simulation and closing Churchill and seeing what happens in real time, in real life? That's my best suggestion, and it's cheap.
And I think that's not up to them, that's up to city, and Rob can address that when we do it. We've talked about this, as you know, at many
And if
CAP
not,
meetings.
why not?
Okay, Rob, you want to address that?
Yeah, we have talked about this before, I think, at the CAP. It's
3 caps.
several times, yeah. It's not something that we would do initially. We want to complete this study first and see what we can learn and see if we feel that that's sufficient to understand what's going to happen here before we would consider something like that. Because that would be really disruptive, and I'm not sure that it would tell us exactly, what would occur.
Rob, it's really upsetting to hear you say it'll be very disruptive. That suggests that absolutely a closure is going to be very disruptive. I think we need to deal with the facts.
Well, it's disruptive in the sense that we wouldn't close Churchill without mitigating the impacts. And what you're suggesting is closing it and not mitigating it and just
I
allowing
think that'll show you where you need to mitigate.
Well, I understand the approach. I think this is the more typical way we would study something like this. So let's complete that first, and we'll go from
So you're saying it's still on the table, it's a possibility?
It's a distant glimmer.
As you leave. Uh-huh.
Okay, Barbara, other
got
questions
it.
before we get Rachel
My second
on?
question is, what is this unacceptable level of service based on city standards? Because it's right where I live. I want to know what that is.
The level of service for city of Palo Alto or the city council has adopted within the city of Palo Alto is level of service D at signalized intersection, which is basically 55 seconds delay per vehicle, and it's a weighted delay. Every vehicle within an hour that comes to an intersection and the total cumulative delay that's experienced at that intersection divided by the total number of vehicles, if you get 55 seconds average delay per vehicle, then you are within the acceptable range. If you go above 55, if it's 55.1 second, then it's an unacceptable delay. I thought that you asked about the delay or acceptable level. So acceptable level, that's what city council has adopted. The city council has not adopted the safety level for the ped and bike.
Okay.
That's how
Rachel?
it's throughout the United States of America.
Rachel.
Thank you. I heard at a CAP meeting with Megan with neighbors that they wanted the raw data. Citizens want to see the raw data. I really appreciate Dave's suggestion about having a toolbox. We've heard the word mitigation in the air. We have really no idea what that means. I live on a residential street. Do you look at the fact that it's a residential street and then becomes a cloverleaf? Because that's what's going to happen to Emerson and Embarcadero. And so I think that there's this idea of what is a residential street, what is an artery, and how do you mitigate given those kinds of things. And I do appreciate your work so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. And we are going to post the raw data and we will get the list.
I just want to respond to one of the last thing what you mentioned about a street classification, whether it's going to be a residential, collector, arterial, and so forth. So as a part of the impact analysis, what we will be conducting, we are also going to be conducting the tire analysis, which basically how much infusion of the traffic is going to be on the residential roadway segments is also going to be evaluated.
So we'll be able to break that down. I need you to get it back on the mic if you're going to talk. You can't talk from the audience.
I'm just wondering about the Waze effect, because Crescent Park suffers from the Waze effect with people trying to get to 101, and I was wondering if modern traffic evaluations take into account these wonderful technological advances.
So the origin destination study that we have taken has accounted for that.
So
Great. Okay, now Nadia gets the last word, and then I do need to move us to the next item because it's 6 o'clock.
Nyan, I wanted to understand, there seems to be an anomaly in the data. So if you look at the morning rush hour, it makes sense. You have more cars going northbound on Alma. But in the afternoon, you seem to have a lot more people going southbound and also going northbound. Did you notice that as well? Or am I reading that correctly?
Yes, we noticed that too.
Do you think it was based on an
anomaly? And maybe,
anomaly?
Nadia, what we can do, we can give you a call and go over with you, because if you look at the OND patterns in the PM, you're going to see the same type of thing.
I had a feeling.
So the turning movements matches
I just want to be
with
sure
the
I was reading it
OND.
right on the record.
No,
Thank you.
that's a good catch. But it matches with the OD patterns in the PM.
Great.
And as a
Thank you.
commuter, I don't always go the same way every time, depending on the time of day. So I'm going to move us on to the community meeting. I just wanted to flag for you, and then we will stand adjourned, that it is not January 23rd. I think we already knew that. It is still March 27th. It is still 6 to 8, and it is still at our regular spot at the park. Mitchell Park. And as you can see, we'll be talking about Churchill as well as the citywide tunnel. And we may have some update to financial information depending on what happens at the next CAP and what we pull together. We will really take to heart this feedback you've given us about making sure that the noticing and everything we give you before the end of the month is super clear, that the status of high-speed rail does not obviate the need to keep talking about this set of projects and to get people to come to the meeting. Do people have questions about this or any comments to make? Phil?
Will this meeting be streamed?
No, it's recorded.
It's recorded, okay, thank you.
Yeah, recorded. Okay, anybody else? Anything for the good of the order? All right, we stand adjourned. Thank you. We support Rob.
Yes, thank you. Good luck.
Thanks to Rob. Thanks to Rob.
Thanks to Rob.